and this is part 2 of adapting Catalyst to common delivery methodologies projects part. We've got one more to go, which is organisational enablement after this. So like I say, this is part 2 of the project topic for discovery sessions. Let's just do a quick recap of part 1. So in part 1, as a quick recap, I covered the topics for projects, planning, design solution, and in this video I'll cover develop solution, test solution, and deploy solution. In general then, I've covered the design and planning sections, and now I look at the implementation stages, starting with the development solution discovery sessions and the topics that this should include. So I left the last video talking about design reviews, so it only seems appropriate that we enter this video and this section of the topic with code reviews. And I did mention these a little bit in the last video as well. So as I said, for the design reviews, the review of the code, if executed properly, will see a significant saving on time, cost and quality. The code review sessions should examine the elements of the code that should be reviewed, the major part of which will be standards and guidelines. Some of these will be dictated by your organisation already, but especially if you're introducing MuleSoft capability into the organisation, some elements will be new. To give you some idea of the discovery sessions in my organisation, we exited these meetings with around 80 different elements that all code should comply with in order to pass the code review gate. In design, it was a lot less. It was about 25 elements, I think, just to give you some indication. Now, obviously, when you're talking about 80 different checks, the more of these that you can automate, the better, as code review process needs to be effective, but also efficient and not a blocker, unless, of course, where necessary, to the overall development process. So while the code review discovery session should be focused on the development of the code review checklist, it also needs to run discovery sessions on how the process may be automated and what tools, if any, need to be used or possibly acquired. So when we're talking about code reviews, that necessarily implies that we will have source code as a product. And by extension to that, we then mean that we have to manage that code through its development lifecycle. Now, I'll come on to testing and deployment shortly, but in this section, I'd also like to suggest that some discovery sessions will involve discussions on source code management and connectors. Now, there are many source code management products to choose from and many ways to operate source code management, and therefore the source code management discovery sessions will need to consider all of the options that are either open to you or could be acquired. Discovery sessions will always have to consider many dimensions, such as the tools and processes required, and the different people may be required to attend a number of different sessions. So like I've said before, careful selection of the attendees for each session is definitely required. Now finally, in this section I need to talk about connectors. MuleSoft Enablement platform provides many connectors for common software such as Oracle, SAS, and of course Salesforce itself. But the discovery sessions need to look at what is available and what can be used and what can and should be developed within the organisation itself. So let's move on to the discovery sessions focused on testing the solutions. Now, these will require people with software testing experience to provide input into how this should be done. Now, as I've said before, your organisation may have a defined testing policy, and it's probably likely that your discovery sessions will have to start from scratch. However, careful consideration should be given to test environments that need to be made available, how these environments will be managed in terms of data updates in each environment, and what type of testing should be conducted in each environment. It's also important to understand and document who will be responsible for each phase of testing. Developers will perform unit testing normally. Another group will undertake integration testing, and you may have other specialized testers who conduct performance testing, but this may be different in your organization. So these discovery sessions need to examine all of these. Of course, normally acceptance testing should be undertaken by end users, or should it? It's a question open to you. Discovery sessions should also look at testing tools that may be available, such as MUnit for undertaking integration and unit tests, which integrates with Maven, but you may, like I say, have your own tool capabilities already in place. Whichever way you decide, I'd always look for automation wherever possible to speed up the development process and the testing process and ensure consistency and accuracy within the test cases. Now finally in this section, we need to conduct discovery sessions with deployment of the final product into the various environments. Remember, we're looking at the complete deployment solution here, not just the final deployment into the production environment. There will be some special considerations for production deployment, such as resilience requirements, that may not have been applicable to the lower environments, but the discovery sessions need to examine the overall deployment solution from dev, test, QA, pre-prod, and finally the production environment. But these, like I say, these environments may be different in your organization. In the deployment discovery sessions, it is also vital to consider the question of service level agreements. Are these going to be defined? I hope so, but how are they going to be defined? Because there are a number of options here, but also how are they going to be measured and reported? If your experience is similar to mine, these sessions can get very complex. An agreement on service level agreements can be a subject of much discussion. But like I've said previously, and will probably say again, try to keep things as simple as possible, because complexity, in my experience, leads to very dark places. The final discovery topic in the projects area is publishing. Now you will need to define what you mean in this context, but there are a number of interpretations, so I'm going to leave this up to you. But here's just a few of my thoughts. If you're talking about publishing documentation, websites, newsletters, etc., leave it up to the people with experience in these areas. I have a data and data analysis background and would be the first to admit that publication of this type is not one of my strong points. However, if you're aiming these discovery sessions at the publication process under the deployment solution section, as I believe is being discussed in the Catalyst course material, you will need different people in the discovery sessions and people with deployment experience from both a code deployment perspective and also from a deployment process perspective, such as your service transition or change management teams. And so I come to the end of the projects topics for discovery sessions part of the course. We have one more very important area to discuss in the next video, which will bring this topic and this area to a close. So more on that in the next video. I hope you can see from this and the last video, the project's discovery sessions will cover a lot of topics and will require much discussion, primarily at the start of the engagements, as I've said, but also in some areas throughout the engagement, which I hope I've sort of conveyed. But I want to conclude here with the key things that I think are important across all discovery sessions. So I suppose this is business tip 1 for this video. Invest time in these discussions because it will bring benefits throughout the engagement. Prepare for each session with an agenda, but be prepared for change as discussions take place. For each discovery session, get someone who is a good facilitator to guide the sessions. Spend time thinking about the attendees for each session and circulate the outcomes of each session to a wider audience for comment, because you may have missed someone with vital input to that subject that could have turned the actual course of that discussion completely. And there are nearly always 4 areas to look at in each section. What you expect to get as an output from each session, the tools that are relevant to that subject area, the processes that are relevant to that subject area, and the people who are relevant to that area of the discussion. So in the next video, I'll be talking about organizational enablement. And like I say, this is the last of the discovery session areas of organizational enablement. Very, very important. And I hope that we'll see you then. Bye for now.